Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Peters, and I'm the past president of the Elgin Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you out this evening on the occasion of our 100th anniversary. I'd now like to turn it over to Don Cosens, another past president of the Society, who will be acting as our Master of Ceremonies for this evening. Don?
Thank you very much, Steve. Your Worship, Mayor Golding, Warden Millman, Mr. Monteith, Madam President of the Ontario Historical Society, Miss Hannah, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you very much, Steve, and the Society for this privilege and honor to be able to act as your Master of Ceremonies this evening. 100 years is a long time. Let us go back to the year 1891 and reflect on the years prior to that. We in St. Thomas and Elgin were living in a very young country, even among some of the original pioneers. It was only 88 years since Colonel Talbot first settled, and 80 years since the first settlers, Rapelje and Mandeville, came to this area. It was 74 years since St. Thomas was first named, and less than 40 years since the city was incorporated as a village. Dr. Coyne, and he wasn't a doctor until 1909, was 42 years of age, and the county had been formed less than 40 years previously. The country itself would not celebrate its 25th anniversary until 1892, and St. Thomas as a city was just 10 years old. Steve Peters, past president and president-elect of the Society, is now going to give you a brief review of the past history of our organization. Steve.
Thanks, Don. On the 29th of April, exactly 100 years ago today, a meeting took place in this home. About 30 members showed up, and the main purpose of it was it was an informal meeting to form a new organization. And this organization was known as the Elgin Historical and Scientific Institute. The nucleus, the driving force behind it was Dr. Coyne, but there was a number of other individuals in the municipality that had a real interest in local history. And I'll just talk about some of this is from the newspaper account of April the 30th of 1891. And it talks about the formation, and it says that the lack of such an institution has long been felt. Every year records are perishing. Early pioneers whose minds are storehouses of information with reference to the early history of the Talbot settlement are passing away. In many instances, this information dies with the possessor. In future years, the historian will seek it in vain. And it's very interesting that 100 years ago, there was a real interest in the need to preserve our local heritage. And I think that was one of the driving forces behind this formation of the Society. Some of the aims of the Society were to collect and preserve Indian vocabularies, folklore, and archaeological specimens. Also, they looked after the investigation of Indian forts, mounds, and the preservation as far as practical. They also looked into the collection and preservation of records of the early settlement of the lakeshore counties by the whites, including histories, newspapers, pamphlets, old letters, books, documents, and personal reminiscences of old pioneers. The investigation of the flora and fauna of this district and recording of the results, and historical and scientific research generally. In 1895, we published our first book, The Historic Sketches of the County of Elgin. In 1897, we were involved in a school essay competition, encouraging students to go out and research their particular school section and the people that had lived there and settled there, and we published a book at that time. In 1901, a women's auxiliary was formed, and the women's auxiliary was headed up by Mrs. J.H. Wilson, Amelia Wilson. Her husband was John H. Wilson, who's a former MP and later a senator from Elgin County. And the Women's Auxiliary coexisted with the Elgin Historical Society. We also attempted in 1901, after the death of Queen Victoria, to erect a monument at the courthouse in commemoration of the reign of Victoria. The Society solicited the various municipalities in the area, but to no avail, and the money was not raised. But if you attend our birthday celebration back at the public library this evening, you'll see the plans that were proposed at that time. 1903 marked the 100th anniversary of the arrival of Colonel Talbot and the beginnings of the Talbot settlement. And it was the Elgin Historical Society that was instrumental in forming a committee that was set to commemorate this 100th anniversary. And there was a week-long celebration that took place in St. Thomas at that time. It was also in 1903. Many of you are familiar with the cairn out at Pinafore Park, the stone cairn, but you may not know that it was erected in 1903 to commemorate the 27 townships that had been settled, or Colonel Talbot played a part in settling. We met regularly through the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. Dr. Coyne remained the driving force behind the society. Another lady played a very active role, and her name was Ella Lewis. Lewis descended from a very early St. Thomas family, and she worked very hard to keep the society together through the 20s and 30s. And she was also responsible for publishing 3 books dealing with the history of the Talbot settlement. The society went dormant in the early 1940s. There were no members. Ella Lewis had died. Dr. Coyne had passed away in 1942. There was a few members that were interested: Warren Miller, Leslie T. Holmes, W. Scott McKay. These gentlemen kept the society going, but it wasn't an active society. The society reorganized in 1946. It's interesting, I see 5 years ago we were trying to preserve the Talbot estate, and back in 1946 the society was reorganized to try and preserve and persuade the government, provincial government, to purchase the Talbot estate, but that did not succeed. W.C. Miller, the former city engineer, kept the society active through the 40s and 50s, and then with the Canadian Centennial in 1967 and the renewed interest in our heritage, Miller was instrumental in the reformation and reorganization of the Elgin Historical Society. And we've been active since 1967 in trying to preserve and educate the public and just make people generally aware of our local heritage and the importance of it. We've published a book in 1989, The Hunt Essays on Elgin County, and we finished 100 years, and we hopefully will be around for another 100 years to make sure that the history of Elgin County is preserved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. At this time, I'd like to call on our local Member of Parliament, Mr. Ken Monteith.
Thanks very much, Don, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to join with you as you celebrate 100 years. I think that the local association should be complimented for this 100th anniversary, drawing it to the attention of the people of Elgin, and I also want to congratulate them for the fine work that they do for preserving the heritage of Elgin County and of the people that have lived here. I'm sure that Steve, you won't be around in 100 years, or I won't be around, but let's hope that somebody is certainly willing to continue to make sure that history is preserved, because like you have indicated, if it's not preserved, we'll never know really what happened. So I just want to say on behalf of the federal government, congratulations. I apologize for the fact I was going to have a plaque here from the federal government to give to you. I'll have to do that another day because must have been the post office didn't get here.
Thank you very much, Ken. We do appreciate you being here. Unfortunately, our member of the provincial parliament, Mr. Peter North, could not be here this evening. I believe there was a rather important engagement that he had to attend to in the House or the legislature this afternoon, and he could not be here. However, he did send a plaque, and Steve has the plaque here that he has sent along.
The plaque reads, Peter North, Member of Provincial Parliament for the riding of Elgin, is pleased to congratulate the Elgin Historical Society on the occasion of their 100th anniversary, dated April 29th, 1991.
At this time, I'd like to call on Her Worship, Mayor Janet Golding, to bring greetings from the city of St. Thomas.
Thank you, Don. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, just as a slight reminder, last month the council took the opportunity to proclaim this, the April 29th to May the 3rd, 91, as the Elgin Historical Society's week in the city of St. Thomas. On behalf of my council, first of all, I think perhaps for some of you that are back visiting in St. Thomas, Steve has been rather bashful perhaps, and in fact even as much as signing a guest book tonight. Steve is a member of City Council, and he is one of the aldermen on council and serves the city very well. So the Historical Society certainly has an excellent spokesman on behalf of Steve on our municipal council. On behalf of myself and other members of council, helps to have big pockets. First of all, on behalf of the Society, I'd like to send congratulations to the Elgin Historical Society on the celebration of your 100th anniversary, presented this day, the 29th of April, on behalf of myself and members of City Council by Mayor Janet Golding, and it's the key to the city. Steve, you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, thank you very much, Janet.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen,
Very well.
Thank you very much, Janet. That's lovely. And now I'd ask Warden Marion Millman to bring greetings from the County of Elgin.
Thank you, Don, and thank you for the invitation. I am pleased to bring greetings to all of you on behalf of Elgin County Council. Congratulations to the Elgin Historical Society. If we don't know our history in the past, how do we know where we're going in the future? It's interesting to hear what has happened in Elgin County over the last 100 years. And I wonder what they'll say 100 years from now when the Elgin Historical Society is still active and comments on what happened even today. Congratulations again to the Society.
Thank you very much, Marion. I would like to be around, but I don't think I will. At this time, I'd like to call on Miss Beth Hanna, President of the Ontario Historical Society. Beth?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this celebration. You've certainly picked a beautiful day for your celebration. It's my pleasure to bring greetings to you on behalf of the members of the Ontario Historical Society, to bring you our best wishes on the celebration of your 100th anniversary. 100 years is certainly a milestone, and it's an indication of the dedication of probably a group of individuals over a period of time, and the dedication of your community, the continuing support of your community over 100 years to the preservation of the rich heritage of that community. And it's always a pleasure to see that kind of dedication in a community like St. Thomas. It's an interesting time to look back and for you to reflect upon the history of your organization as well as the history of your community, and to have seen that organization grow and develop over a period of time. I wish you the very best, and I do indeed hope that in 100 years there will be a group of people gathered on this very lawn once again to celebrate yet another milestone, a 200th anniversary of an historical society, striving to preserve the rich heritage of the community. I wish you all the best. Thank you for inviting me, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Beth. And don't leave, we're going to have a little bit to do afterwards. It's very nice that the Historical Society saw fit to send Beth and that she could come to be with us tonight. We do appreciate it very much. At this time, I'd like to call on Mr. Richard Haddo, President of the North Yarmouth Historical Society, for a few words, a sister society.
Thank you, Don. Congratulations. The last time I stood on this porch was the centennial of the city, and I was fortunate enough to be much slimmer than I am today. They took a picture of my family holding some kittens, and this picture ended up in the time capsule. I don't know if you recall that or not, Mr. Walker, but that was the last time I think I stood here. I know that was only a few years ago. Thank you very much for the invitation. Our Historical Society is very happy to be here. We have 5 members of our society here this afternoon. We've been very fortunate to work with you over the years, and always enjoyed your enthusiasm and and your success and your projects. Unlike Ken Monteith, I'm not going to wait for the mail. I'm going to invite you all to our meeting on Sunday. We will be meeting at 1:30 at the Conservation Authority offices just north of the city, and it will be our quarterly meeting. We have Mr. Cross from Elmer, who will be our guest speaker. Our meeting starts at 1:30, and you're all welcome to join us for potluck. Don't want to take any thunder from you, though. It's a nice evening, as the lady said, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. And at this time, I'd like to call on Don Carroll to bring greetings from the West Elgin Historical and Genealogical Society. Don?
No. I'd like to bring greetings from West Elgin, where the Talbot settlement began, and wish the society the best of luck in the years to come.
Thanks, Don. Thanks very much. And now Mark Doherty, who is chairperson of the Elgin County branch of the Ontario Genealogical Society. Mark.
Thanks, Don. On behalf of the Elgin branch of the Ontario Genealogical Society, I wish you a very happy 100th birthday. We've enjoyed working with the Historical Society the past several years and hope that relationship will continue for a long, long time.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, the next page on my notes is identical to what Steve said earlier. I don't know whether he looked over my shoulders and copied it, but you could almost read it verbatim, telling about how Warren Miller, L.T. Holmes, and Scott McKay kept the society alive through the down days that we had after Miss Lewis died. And certainly they did. And then in 1967, as Steve said, through the inspiration of Warren Miller, the society was reestablished, revitalized, and put together a new constitution. And under the able direction of George Thorman, we have the society that we have today. And now I give to you our oldest living president, our only honorary president, an ardent historian, and the one and only George E. Thorman.
It'd be better if J.H. Coyne was here. You know, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, somebody put a pile of stuff in my door after I came in from cutting the grass, and I said I was to make a talk about James H. Coyne. He arranged things a little better when he started this society in 1891. I'm going to be as brief as I can. James Henry Coyne, born 1849, died 1942. His father was William Coyne, a merchant in St. Thomas, and of course his grandfather was that Henry Coyne out in West Elgin. He was a brilliant scholar. He went to school on Stanley Street at the Old Common School, and then he went to the grammar school there, and he finished that in 1865, and he was too young to go to university. So he took a job with E.M. Yarwood, and I might say in 1866 he gave out over $65,000 worth of money to buying grain for E.M. Yarwood. But he decided he'd go back to school and brush up on his Latin and French. And the school then was Union School, where Wellington Street School is now. And while he was there, the Fenian agitations were on. Can you hear me all right? Yes. All right, the Fenian agitations were on. His brother Isaac joined the St. Thomas Rifles. And James Coyne joined it too. And they used to drill just west of where Wellington Street School is. Now, his military career, from March the 8th to March the 31st, they were called over to London. And Coyne kept a diary all his life. And a lot of his diaries should be published. This is the one for March the 8th, 1866. Thursday. Rose at 6:20. Learned 2 pages of Cicero and a page of Charles XII. Was called out of school this morning to go against the Finnegans. We were locked up in the town hall all afternoon and came over to London this evening, where we were billeted at Hiscox. Was over to Green's a while and went to bed at 10. Green was his sister, married a man named Green. I'd just like to read you another one. He always read and studied. He's reading the New Testament in French at this time. On Saturday, March 31st, the last day in London, rose at 7:25. Companies at present in the city were disbanded from active service today, and our company returned home this afternoon, escorted to the station by the London Volunteer Band, and from the St. Thomas station by our cavalry band. Snowed some last night. Snowed and raining all day, but mild and pleasant. Went to bed at 10:30. Then no Fenian invasion took place in March. But on June the 1st, this is his diary. Friday, rose at 6, learned 2 pages of Horace's 3rd book of Odes, splendid warm weather. Hang those Finnegans. Was called out of school again this morning. Company drilled and fooled around all afternoon. Came to Port Stanley this evening at 8:30. 10 of us were billeted on McCorkle. We drilled until 11 when we broke off and I went to bed. The 2nd of June, Saturday, rose with the sun, drilled nearly all day. Very hot battle, very hot. Battle of Lake Erie took place today. That was the Battle of Bridgetown. This evening, the St. Thomas, Vienna, and Port Stanley companies with Shanley's battery came to Sarnia by train. We did not arrive till after midnight, and our company was lodged in an old schoolhouse with bare boards to lie on. So he was in Sarnia for a while. And then the last day there, it says Monday, rose at, this is the 18th of June, rose at 7 o'clock, rained heavily last night, all through the day and storm. A strong cold north wind blowing, read 160 pages of Dread. That was a novel, adventure novel. Parade at 9:30, we were addressed by Lieutenant Colonel Richardson. His grave's over in the graveyard there. Assembled in the cars at 1, left Sarnia at 4, and got home at 8:30, where we were met with a perfect ovation and refreshments and speeches in the town hall. Meeting closed with a fight. Somebody got a little too drunk. The paper never said anything about the fight. Went to bed at 11:15. And then one more. There were about 25,000 troops were called out in March 1866 in June. So then they had a big camp down at Thorold, and he went to that. So he says, Friday, August the 17th, St. Thomas Rifles proceeded by train to Thorold, stopping an hour at London. Went at once to camp on the heights, where we put up our tents and got our blankets at 9. 1,500 men here, lots of our boys drunk. Though the recommendation of Ensign Coyne, Captain Farrell, that Ensign Coyne would be his brother Isaac, Captain Farrell made me his quartermaster sergeant. And always thereafter, he referred to himself as Quartermaster Sergeant Coyne. And they had Fenian celebrations in 1896, 1901, when they got their medals. And I'd like to know what happened to the medals that Isaac and James H. Coyne got. If anybody ever finds them, we'd love to have one in the museum. And in 1906 was the final one. And he was always interested in soldiers. He played a big part in helping soldiers after the war and in forming the soldier societies and organizations. Gotta find my speech now. Oh, dear. Now, after the high school and the Fenians, he went to university that fall of 1866. He graduated in 1870, took all top prizes. Then he went into, taught at the Cornwall Grammar School for 1 year, came back to St. Thomas and studied law, went down to Toronto and qualified, returned here in 1874 as a junior partner with Colin McDougall. Then in 1886, he ran in the provincial election as a Crib, of course, and going to office Bristol, reformer, and he was defeated by A.B. Ingram by 43 votes. That's the last time he ran. Nice guy to do politics. So as a reward for it, he was rewarded by being made registrar at the local register in 1888. He was married in 1877 to Swan Duran and Matilda Bowles. They had 6 children, all of whom were eminently successful, and their children were successful, and he took a great deal of pride in the success of his children. Now, he had great influence on 2 societies, the local society, which he founded in 1891, and then the Ontario Historical Society, was known as the Pioneer and Historical Society of Ontario. It kind of needed to be revitalized. It was a little closed corporation. And the Honorable George Ross, Minister of Education, asked Coyne to revitalize it, and he did so under the title of the Ontario Historical Society, and he was president from 1898 to 1902, and the number of members grew from 11 to 337. Got another page somewhere. When you get old, your fingers won't separate the paper. Hugh Stevenson, a local student, did a MA thesis on James Coyne, and he gave a copy to the library here, but some rotten so-and-so stole it out of the library, and we'd like to get another copy of that. Coyne had a great influence as a historian, and yet he doesn't have a big body of historical work. His major works are Galenay Narrative, which is published in 1903 by the Ontario Historical Society, and this is a translation from the French, and it's the French people regard it as a very excellent and accurate translation, and his footnotes are very accurate, and it is an outstanding piece of work. And he also published the Coyne papers. I don't want to say too much about, he tied up with the Royal Society of Canada, and he published the 2 volumes on the Talbot papers. Now, these are not original work. These are arranging and annotating and writing footnotes. And then he did any of you have that Pioneer Sketches of 1903, Historical Sketches of Elgin County. He did the first one, The Country of the Neutrals. And that's a piece of work I'm always going back to and checking on. He's always very accurate. He did a large number, he helped a lot of people. You know, he could have written a lot of history, but he worked in so many other organizations, with the Royal Society, the Ontario Historical Society, with our own local historical society, with the veterans. And he wrote a bunch of little monographs, David Ramsay and Long Point, Colonel Talbot's relation to London, the Bold Canadian, the identification of the site near Port Dover, which is a very important piece of work, and he did a lot of research on that. And the Lake Erie Cross is about him. He also published several things in Ontario Historical Records, the discovery and exploration of the Bay of Quinte. Then he discovered Ontario and its provinces, one of those big lengthy books that nobody reads anymore. But he did a very important article there on the explorers of the Great Lakes for that series. And if you have it at home, not too many people would have it anymore, it's still worth reading. He spent a lot of time writing little things. This is the 1914 St. Thomas as Men of Affairs. He wrote the article on education in this, and I don't know how many times I've gone back to look at that. The only trouble with it is that somebody made a typographical error and said that his father, William, had made the motion to make education free in St. Thomas in 1890. And then these things, once typographical error takes place. They recopy it. It's recopied in this reissue of it. It was 1870 that William Coyne made that motion. I look back on Coyne as a very, very humanitarian type of man. And in this house, he had probably the very best library in Ontario. Don tells me they think sometimes the Coyne didn't eat just quite as well as they should because he was spending money on historical books. After his death, the library was sold to the Dora Hood Book Room in Toronto. And in her book, she said, she wrote a book of memoirs, she said it was the finest library she had ever purchased. That's kind of too bad, it was all spread out. He had all the French works like Galenay, and I think he had everything except the first Champlain edition. But he's a man who had a great deal to do with this county, and I think of him not as a historian so much, he was an important historian, but for his influence on other people and the way he helped so many other people. And for the little things he did. And it's a great pleasure to honor his memory today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. You see why I didn't tell him he had to do this until 3 o'clock. There was no sense of worrying about it yesterday. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we also have another very special guest with us tonight. A grandson of Dr. Coyne, Mr. Robert Taylor, has come to be with us tonight, and I'm going to ask him to step forward and maybe give a few reminiscences of some of the days, maybe right here in this house.
The memories come crowding in. I knew James Coyne, or he knew me, for 28 years. I knew this house. I think every Sunday evening from about 1918 to 19 until 1942, when he died, I had supper with my family. I was going to also tell you the story about his one venture into politics. But since my wife is here, whose grandfather was the survivor of the contest, my grandfather afterwards was known as the Liberal candidate. My wife's grandfather was known as the Confederate member. Just two more things. Of course, my grandfather was a great influence on me, as he was on many others. And my love of literature, of music, for many of those Sunday evenings during the 30s when we were here, we used to listen to what many of you won't remember. It was called the Fourth Sunday Evening Hour. Two reminiscences about this house, about that room. My mother was married there. I wasn't present, but I understand that I am a consequence. And George, you're not quite right about the library, because sometime in the middle 50s, Jimmy Tallman, who was then chief librarian of the University of Western Ontario, spent all day in that room going over those parts of his library that later became, and still are, part of the library at Western. I think that's all that I would like to say. As I say, the memories keep crowding in, and I could go on all night, but I would be talking to myself. Oh, just two added thoughts. 40 times around this track is a mile, or it used to be. And I have the Fenian medals.
Thank you very much, Bob. I rather think George knew that. He was just throwing out a hint. What a great honor it is, sir, to have you with us today. It really is. It's just brings it all together. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much. We also have Miss Barbara Coyne, who is a grandniece of Dr. Coyne, and we're very pleased to have you with us all the time.
Oh, thank you, Don.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And also, we have Mrs. Scott McKay and her daughter, Rachel Hornback. Where are they? They're over here. Oh, they're moving around on me. There they are over there. Mrs. McKay is the daughter-in-law of K.W. McKay, who was a charter member of the Society in 1891, and our first librarian. And her late husband, Scott, was very active in the Society. He served a term as president in the 1940s, and he was always interested in the advancement of the Elgin Historical Society. He was one of those who kept it going through the drought that we had. Now back to 1891 and looking forward to 1991. In 1891, on this date, and it was exactly on this date, Sir John A. Macdonald, our first Prime Minister, was still at the helm. Not for very long, he passed away in the early part of June of that year, and thus an important era of Canadian history came to an end. Cars or automobiles weren't thought of in 1891, and it would be 10 or 11 years until they were seen on the streets of St. Thomas. Electricity did not illuminate our homes until another 20 years would pass. Queen Victoria was still on the throne in England, and she would reign for another 10 years, to be followed by a succession of 5 monarchs. And her great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth, is now on the throne, and she has just passed her 65th birthday. 2 world wars, devastating world wars, and a backbending depression has affected every family in Canada since that time. A bit about the founders of the Society. Steve briefly mentioned them. They were relatively young men when they founded our Society in 1891. And as all good historians, they were to live a long life. Judge Ermatinger, the first vice president of our society, lived for more than 30 years after that time. Frank Hunt, Squire Hunt, our first editor, was to live almost 40 years, until 1928. And Dr. Coyne, the first president, and K.W. McKay, the first librarian, both lived past the half-century after the Society was founded. K.W. McKay died in 1941 and Dr. Coyne in 1942. Frank Farley, who was probably the youngest of the founding fathers, the son of John Farley, a local barrister who just lived over there on Farley Place, he also lived the longest. He passed away a little over 40 years ago in 1949. At this time, we have come to the end of this part of the program, and I want to particularly thank Lois and Bob Farley for dressing up so elegantly tonight. Really. Lois and Bob, that does add an awful lot to the evening, honestly. And I want to thank George and Verna Walker for allowing us to come here on this evening on the exact 100th anniversary of the founding of the Society. It does certainly mean a lot to be on the actual spot that it all started. And we do thank you very, very much for this privilege. And we'll see you all at the library. You certainly may. You can give the benediction, Janet, if you'd like to.
Ladies and gentlemen, I I apologize. I neglected to mention that on June the 14th, the City Council will be officially rededicating City Hall. For those of you that are visiting, perhaps if you're staying over, I'll be, as always, in City Hall all day tomorrow. If you wish to come and take a look at the refurbished City Hall, I'll be more than pleased to give you some tours. As well, though, for the members of the community, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of June will be the opening and rededication of City Hall. And at this time, I extend a personal invitation to all of you to, if you don't have an opportunity beforehand, to please to tour. This afternoon, we took the opportunity to rehang, if that's the proper term, the former mayors. And
Your turn's coming.
no, it's not. The 5 former paintings have been hung, as well as the crest, the original crest of the city, were hung in the council chambers this afternoon. So even if you don't wish to wait until the 14th of June, please take an opportunity to go up to City Hall during business hours and take a tour through. You're more than welcome to do so. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
On behalf of Marcia Sadler, the president of the Society, who couldn't be with us this evening, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out and partaking in our 100th anniversary. It's a special time for all of us, and I know that the Society is going to go on for many more years and working to preserve our history. And just to remind everybody that we're going to be serving cake and punch at the public library in the Carnegie Room. So please join us up there for some cake. And before you leave, if you have the opportunity, please take a look around the wonderful, well-kept grounds of Mr. and Mrs. Walker.
400 feet.
400 feet to the back, George says. Thank you again for coming out and partaking in our birthday celebrations. Before everybody leaves, we want to have a group photograph taken on the front lawn of everybody that was here this evening to
I read that.
She's going to stand behind you, and I'm going to stand behind her.
I read it. I saw his name on the original. Rossi, that's a member. Curator, that's your
Well, if you're going to get a look at it, so we could look now, but this photographer.
where are you going with that, Mark?
You just hang on so I get all your names, okay?
Come on, Don, get in here.
Don,
I was in.
get it. Yeah, he was in.
But this might be one he chooses, and you're not going to be.
No, I'll choose the one I want.
Do you want to climb up here, Don?
No, it's okay.
While Don's doing that, let's have everybody move forward 5 feet. Chairs too, please. Everybody move forward about 5 feet.
I think on the chair.
Okay, that's great. Now just kind of spread out a little bit more if you can't be seen. And
Come on, Don.
we'll have Don hustle back for one shot.
Stand behind you.
They can see better.
Okay, look up here so your face can be seen. If you're hiding behind somebody else, try to tilt your head. Look up here. Say whiskey.
Whiskey.
Say money.
Money.
Thank you very much.
Well, Melvin, you gotta go again.
There's a couple plaques just inside the front door if anybody wanted to have a look at commemorating the house of Dr. Coyne.
I'm gonna try and get the library over. Oh yeah, that's what. See you later. I don't think he wants the money now.
Yeah, well, I get
Okay. Oh, it's nice. Thanks for coming out. Well, I keep busy.
Don, think that thing's on? Works? I don't think it's fixed this yet. He's got it right.
How do you want to do this? They're all against this one. That's the one for them. Should we turn around and see?
Yeah, I want to get a picture here, you guys.
Okay. You want to put the cake out on this table here?
Yes.
And then I'll have here. Okay. Come join us. Should we all agree? Should we say happy birthday? I don't know. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Elgin Historical Society. Happy birthday to you.
No, I'm not.
Well, we did. We're gonna come. Here, I'll grab some plates.
Don, Mankato.
up and, oh, you gonna serve it? Don't be shy, ladies and gentlemen. Come and have some birthday cake. Want to do it out here again, Doc?
Yeah.
Just kind of toss it up. Or if you want to just... Okay. Sure. You can smile for the camera there. Okay, Don?
Yep, that's great. Except Mrs. Taylor didn't get in there.
I'm not a coin.
You're not? You're darn close to it.
Like a piece of cake?
Jennifer, going over here.
Well, we're going to have to eat it anyways.
Bob, this is my darling young Jennifer. This is my cousin too. Jennifer asked me. Yes, yes. I know. My nephew is now asking. He's just at an age in being said. And last time he called me, he's in Toronto. What is He's right there. All these things. So, and I just, yes, it's wonderful. And I just came across, I saw it lost years ago, delightful reminiscence from great-grandfather William. And
Now, where's your father in there, Barbara?
Here.
Where's James?
There.
Boy, he's young there.
But he's younger than he was. I think Grandpa was the eldest.
Where's John?
See, I'm not sure. I think that's John. I'm not dead sure, but I'll find out. But that's my grandmother. So they were first cousins.
Oh, goodness.
And she was a gardener. So his mother was a gardener. So I got these double cousins. And actually, she's my cousin. They're both my cousins.
And you're connected to the Penhales, too, I believe, somehow. John's wife was a Penhale, I believe.
I don't know. I know I'm Patterson and Gardner and Bacchus, of course, on the other side. And your other side is Bacchus. Yes. I'm sorry, Don. I didn't ask you that road.
No.
I'm Ray Williams, and this is my wife, Kathy.
I'm glad to meet you. Just a few. Absolutely. Steve said